Hello, everyone. My name is Evan Ortlieb, and welcome to another edition of Education for Today. We're going to be looking at multi-tiered systems of supports, and also known as MTSS. Some people have traditionally called this RTI, but there are nuances and differences between the two because RTI is sort of after the fact of how do we adjust based upon initial instruction. Multi-tiered systems of support are sort of all of the tiers and all of the considerations beyond just academics. So we're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to start with a fact or fiction test for you. So let's go ahead and run through a few of these. We call them fact or fib. MTSS addresses only students' academic performance. Well, based upon what I mentioned a second ago, that is a fib. MTSS is a framework that supports the whole child, social emotional learning included, and also classroom management or behavior supports are part of this framework. The second one, MTSS puts a greater emphasis on prevention than intervention, and that is a fact. MTSS is a framework that supports a strong core of instruction. When core instruction is solid, it cuts down on the number of students that need intervention in subsequent tiers. The next one, providing English learners or special education students accommodations is an example of tier 2 instruction. This is a fib. It's not true. Providing students support for those particularly with disabilities or even English learners should be part of all tier 1 core instruction. Providing students with accommodations in order to help them succeed across all areas of the curriculum is necessary for everyone to be on an equitable playing field. The next is MTSS is something that students must go through to delay evaluation for special education. This is a fib. MTSS is not something that students have to progress through and wait 2 to 4 months before something can be done about it. It's a framework that supports the needs of the whole child from day one of the school year. And it also accompanies RTI as part of its core framework. The next one is progress should be monitored frequently, at least monthly, but ideally weekly or bi-weekly. This is a fact. It's vital that teachers know where students are at any given moment so they can meet them where they are and not have undue and inappropriate expectations. That's the way to optimize the growth potential and also reach that potential. The next one is students must be referred to participate in MTSS, and that is not true. That's a fib. It's an important distinction to make between RTI and multi-tiered systems of supports. RTI is part of this larger framework, and most of the time, students are referred to the RTI process to identify specific intervention needs for individual students. MTSS is a framework that accompanies RTI, but it places a larger emphasis on core instruction to prevent such a high need for a tier 2 and tier 3 intervention support. So to start things off, if I asked you, select one of these 3 memes, A, B, or C, in terms of which one best represents your current understanding of MTSS, would it be, I don't have the first clue? Would it be, I'm trying to connect the dots and pieces? Or would it be, we got this? So when we think about our learning objectives today, we're going to explore what our state of South Carolina's MTSS successes have been thus far as a primary structure for teaching and learning. We're going to try to increase our foundational knowledge on this topic, recognize what are the supports built into this framework, and try to better understand the potential applications of this framework within your particular school context. If we look at this figure right here, MTSS is the primary framework because it's a natural evolution of the work that we've been doing in South Carolina for a number of years, and it pulls on all the work into one comprehensive structure that supports each of these initiatives. Districts across the state have been doing great work using the tenets of response to intervention and other instruction, positive behavior intervention and support, and most recently, social emotional learning. When these frameworks and things work together, we create an environment where all students can succeed and learn. MTSS addresses academic, behavioral, and social emotional development in a fully integrated system of support. And when implemented with fidelity, MTSS has resulted in increased student achievement, positive student behavior, and whole child wellness. And the greatest benefit of all is that it eliminates the weight that's necessary, or that weight mentality that we've had years and years of living through, if you will. And instead, it's a proactive and individualized support system. All students are able to move quickly and fluidly between tiers of intervention in each area of focus. When we think about what does it mean to provide equity-based inclusive education, we have to think about the allocation of resources. Have we positioned those resources, whether it be texts, whether it be computer programs, whether it be supplemental materials, have we created those? It could even be supplemental materials in Spanish language, like dual language books, all sorts of different options there. How we provided the means necessary for all students to thrive. That's something that you have to reflect upon as an educator in your school context, in your classroom, perhaps. We have to be driven by multi-tiered systems of support, and a lot of this utilizing the universal design for learning process that we've already talked about. We are also guided by district and school design teams. So if you don't have one of these teams for MTSS in your school, you might want to think about putting one together and leaning on leadership to be able to get the support to be able to do so. And this implemented in a manner results in gains for all students, not just the top learners, not just the ones at the bottom end of the spectrum, but everybody in between. So the multi-tiered systems of support right here, if you look, I'll scoot over for you. We have at the top, universal design for learning. At the bottom, we have multi-tiered systems of support. This encompasses both the collaboration and instruction, but also the curriculum and assessment components. An educationally equitable framework can be characterized by a continuum of evidence-based practices for academic, behavioral, and social emotional support. This framework includes all sorts of things, from universal screenings to the core curriculum across those tiered levels, data-informed decision-making, high-quality instruction, and purposeful and intentional implementation. So let's go through these 3 tiers of support systems that are in place. The key here is that each of these tiers within MTSS builds upon one another. Oftentimes we see a child receiving appropriate tier 3 support, but misses the crux of tier 1 or tier 2 instruction and ends up in tier 3 instruction all too soon. We have an incredible opportunity to focus our time and talents on tier 1 universal support using evidence-based programs and practices. And if we do our job, at least 80% of students should be able to meet benchmarks across various content areas, including literacy, by just having a solid tier 1 instructional framework. So this is critical because it starts with these clear goals by what do we expect of all students to learn? How will we know if they've learned that? And what are progress monitoring techniques that we can put into place? Tier 2 instruction is the supplemental and targeted supports that we can put in where we can ask questions such as, where are the students performing now? Where do we want them to go from here? How long will we have to have them in tier 2 before we can get them back on track? How much do they have to grow per year, monthly, weekly, over the year in order to get back on track? And what resources can we put in place to help them achieve at a greater rate? Tier 2 instruction is designed to bridge the gap, the learning gap that is, for students who are approaching grade level mastery, but who haven't reached it yet. Students who need additional support to reach independence in reading grade level text, for instance, are provided with supplemental instruction in addition to the core tier 1 instruction. And finally, tier 3 instruction should not be confused. Oftentimes people think that MTSS is the same thing as RTI. We've mentioned that it's not. Tier 3 instruction is the individualized, intensive instruction that some people need. It could be in early literacy around phonemic awareness and phonics. Later on, it could be related to vocabulary acquisition or even critical reading comprehension. All sorts of things could be the issue. We have to be able to dissect what exactly is going on and how do we provide the instruction, filling in those gaps, and also building upon student strengths. That's something that's not done enough of. And it's effective if there is progress going towards that benchmark and or progress monitoring goals. So where is the student performing now? Where do we want him or her to be a month from now? So on and so forth. We have to be able to keep track. We have to be able to implement our instruction with fidelity. We can't just come at it in an unplanned or untrained way. We have to use best practices that are a best fit for our specific situations in our local context. So some additional food for thought. Where is your district with regard to tiered instruction? What have you seen? Have you seen them focus on the academics? Have you seen them focus on the social emotional learning? Have you seen them focus on different things, right? Are they better at tier 1? Are they better at tier 2 or tier 3, right? MTSS is giving all children everything that they need as long as they need it, but not longer. Just like tutoring or any kind of intervention, it should take place for a short period of time in order to propel people to have success back in the whole classroom and back in an independent learning environment. And the key elements by tiers. First, assessment of universal screening and benchmarking should occur 3 times per year using evidence-based core instruction and instruction implemented with fidelity. Second, assessment of progress monitoring in an area of concern about 1 time a month using evidence-based supplemental instruction and instruction implemented with fidelity. And finally, assessment of progress monitoring in an area of concern can happen 1 time per week in tier 3 instruction. And again, you would be using evidence-based intensive instruction and instruction implemented with fidelity. Here's an easy way to try to keep track of our tiered instruction within multi-tiered systems of support. What has been successful with this individual student? What has not? How do we know that it's been successful? What assessment tool have we used? What were other factors that may have led to that success? Even if we're not doing a standardized assessment, we can jot down our observations in, let's say, a black and white notebook, one page per learner, keep track over time. And as they progress through multiple levels of tiered instruction, you want to do these progress monitoring items more and more often in order to stay on top of things. So finally, all the different supports include having leadership put together a team of experts on MTSS to study this from the whole school dynamic. Oftentimes you'll see certain schools have a better program with early literacy. Let's talk about phonics, if you will. And then other times, like word reading, other times you'll see programs that are stronger in reading comprehension and a little bit looser when it comes to early word reading. And so you have to think about putting a team together to address some of these issues. Capacity building. How are we continuing to develop as professionals, as teachers and administrators, coaches and interventionists at schools? We have to think about professional development opportunities and a communication and collaboration plan. When things are not going well, we need to be okay to say, you know what, it could be better. How would you address this? We need to be able to talk across the aisle and between grade levels, right? Just because we're in 8th grade, for instance, right now, and somebody else is in 6th grade, it doesn't mean that they never taught 8th grade. It doesn't mean that they never taught 6th graders who weren't ahead of the game. And so there's lots of opportunities there for collaboration. Problem solving process, it has to be a logical, linear progression where we use evidence-based strategies. And as it says here, multiple tiers of instruction and intervention. And finally, data evaluation each and every day, ongoing, standardized, includes standardized tests, if you will, but it is always going to be benchmarking. It's going to be criteria-based, end of the week tests. It's going to be all sorts of different indicators to provide you with as much data as possible on multiple data points, including external variables that are outside of your control that impact the degree with which children learn in your classroom. Finally, this is it's sort of a two-part rubric. Number one is on the principal of a school. And is the principal actively communicating and supporting the leadership team around MTSS? And secondly, is that leadership team expressing and articulating explicit expectations for the facilitation and implementation of the overall MTSS strategies for your school? And how are other people providing input to that overall process? Finally, what can you start doing today with respect to MTSS? In a leadership capacity, you could be developing a common language and putting together some professional development resources for everybody in your school. You can also be increasing the ways in which you collaborate with others, whether it be allocating certain times, sharing data, but also sharing responsibilities. Maybe I'm going to go look into this and you go look into that. Maybe I'm going to think about putting a lesson together next week and you're going to be and I'm working on tier 1 and you're working on a lesson on tier 2 and she's working on a lesson for tier 3 when it comes to phoneme segmentation, let's say. Whole child focus, thinking about people's interests, attitudes, motivations, and the strengths that they possess and the cultural funds of knowledge that they bring to the table, and access the abilities that they already possess. Don't just look at the negatives. Look at every single child as having worth and value. And finally, reviewing data often and always. Is it accessible? Is my instruction accessible? Are there multiple pathways, as we talked about within the UDL, Universal Design for Learning, with multiple representations and multiple means of articulation? Is my instruction understandable, right, to everybody? If I showed a video, or maybe I should have an audio clip, maybe I should also write things down. Maybe I should have some guided notes. You need to keep things moving and keep it in multi-modes when at all possible. And is it usable? Is the ways in which I instruct today reusable by myself later on and also other people across the aisle in my particular school system? These are some ideas around multi-tiered systems of support. I hope that it was beneficial. Please like this video if you found it that way. If not, feel free to leave some comments and I'm happy to address those. Subscribe to this channel and stay tuned for all things education for today. Take care.